Hello. Good afternoon to our West Coast friends, and good evening to everybody else. My name is Stephanie Brown, and I'm the admissions coordinator for the college internship program at the Brevard Center. Here with me tonight, I have a few of my colleagues: Ryan, our academic coordinator; Jodi, our student advisor; Jennifer, our career coordinator; and Anthony, our life skills coordinator. They will all be telling you a little bit more about themselves later on. Tonight I'm going to go ahead and start with the goals for this session. And our goals for the session today are first for us to give ideas on how to help you better prepare your student for the future. We're going to share some resources with you so you will be able to better assist your student. And we're going to help you find new ways to encourage your student to be independent. Transition can be scary. We put a lot of energy into getting our students, especially with learning differences, through high school. And as you know, there's usually a lot of supports. All of a sudden, it's graduation day, and we're so excited. And we wake up the next morning, and it's like, oh no, now what? So as you see from this illustration here, this is illustrating that there becomes a gap. We have all these supports in high school. And then as we start transitioning over into college, there's a gap. So what we need is some sort of bridge because we really don't want to lose any. And unfortunately, we do. So part of the transition issue is at home, they've had minimal responsibilities. They've had to do laundry, but if they didn't do it, there was always mom and dad or somebody there to do it for them. Now, if they're living out on their own, it's going to be totally their responsibility. And if the laundry's not done, it's dirty clothes. The social time changes. When they're in high school, it's parent-led. The parent is saying, come on, let's go to the movies, or why don't you call Susie and see if she wants to go have dinner with you. When you're in college, there's no parent pushing you to be social. It becomes more self-led, which can be difficult. If they have a job, they're used to working for extras, maybe to go to the movies or get that new jacket that they saw in the store. But now they're going to be working to keep the lights on, to keep the water going so they can take a shower. And they haven't had to do that before. It's just always been magic. They go from a very structured class environment in high school, a teacher telling you when the homework should be due. If the homework's not turned in, a teacher scolding you, to all of a sudden college, where it's a more independent learning environment. The time to start is not the day after graduation. These are skills that have to be taught early on, the better. What we tend to do sometimes, as you know, executive functioning is a huge part of preparing. And that comes from our prefrontal cortex. As parents, we tend to act as our students' prefrontal cortex. So yes, they're getting the homework done and they're getting things done, but don't fool yourself. You have to ask yourself the question, are you their prefrontal cortex? So in preparing them, it's like stacking a cake. That's how I like to think of it. When we stack a cake, we have to have the strongest layer at the bottom. Now, there's always some debate as to what the strongest layer is. So this is kind of how we see it. Social skills is the bottom layer, life skills stacking on top of that, then careers and academics. And you'll notice the life skills layer and the social skills layer is about the same size, as well as career and academics. So now I'm going to go to my staff, go to Jodi. And Jodi is going to start us off in talking about social skills and what we can do to help our student with those. Jodi?
Thanks, Stephanie. My name is Jodi Pierce, and I'm the Social Skills Coordinator here at the Brevard Center. This July, I'm celebrating my 7th anniversary working at the Brevard Center, and prior to that, I had a 12-year career as a behavior analyst. So this evening, I'm going to speak a little bit about social skills. And before we get to the actual social skills, I want to talk a little bit about theory of mind. Theory of mind is what you could consider to perhaps be the language or the vocabulary of social skills. It's the knowledge base that students need in order to be able to use good social communication. And one of the ways that we teach that at the Brevard Center is through our curriculum in theory of mind and in relationship development. So, we are able to give our students some specific information about how social communication is supposed to work. And as a parent, a few of the things that you can do to help your student with understanding the vocabulary behind social skills is talk a little bit about perspective taking. Perspective taking is the foundation of theory of mind. It's being able to understand and see something from the viewpoint of another person. A good way to do that with your child is to ask a lot of questions. Help them to understand what angles other people might be coming from in their interaction, what their motivation might be, what their intention might be, and kind of help them be good detectives in perspective taking and determine, where the other person's thoughts are coming from and what their intentions and motives might be. It's also about understanding nonverbal communication. Nonverbal communication is so much of our social communication. So it's really teaching them to make the best impression from the very beginning with their appearance and other things like their dress and the way that they hold themselves, their posture, and whether or not they're coming across as a confident person. So the nonverbal communication is very important. And also teaching our students how to accurately read others in various social situations. And then also how to face their desire to always remain honest and rule-bound and see things black and white. Learn to balance that with some sensitivity, depending on what their audience is and what the circumstances and context are. As we know, 100% honesty isn't always the best way to go. So in theory of mind, students learn the differences between those different social nuances and how to kind of determine them. Some strategies that you can use to assist your student with social and communication strategies are teaching them the importance of eye contact in greetings. Our first impression usually takes about 3 seconds, and then someone makes an opinion of us based on how we look, how we carry ourselves, how we act. So this is a skill that you can practice with your student quite a bit. Teach them to dress for success. Teach them to find resources even on the internet and see what appropriate dress is for any given situation so that they're able to then meet those expectations and be appropriately dressed for that situation. You need to look at grooming and appearance, the fine details that really lead people to make a good first impression, making sure that they're clean, that they're, have paid attention to shaving or makeup, hairstyles, things like that. We have a wealth of information on the internet and just through observing people that they like and admire on what looks good and what doesn't look good. Practice these with your students. Stand in front of the mirror, try different facial expressions and things like that so that they are able to project themselves as a confident, well-styled individual, because that does make a big difference. Smiling. Practice smiling again in front of the mirror. Get those facial expressions perfected to where your student is just able to quickly fit in by controlling their facial reaction and adjusting it accordingly. Saying hello, greeting other people is so very important. And many of our students really struggle to do so. They're shy, they have difficulty making eye contact, so really being comfortable saying hello to just about anybody that you meet. You can practice with your family and your friends, practice with cashiers at stores, teachers, any individual that your student walks past. It may be appropriate for them to say hello to that person, smile, make eye contact, and then practicing those, they get more confident over time. Phone call etiquette. Make sure that your students are able to place phone calls. Make sure that they're able to appropriately greet the person, identify who they are, what the purpose and intent is of their call. That's very, very important. Then we also want to look at the art of conversation. And again, I'm going to turn back to people watching, looking things up online, looking at video clips on YouTube, on TV shows, in the movies, and looking at how people approach each other and how they talk to each other, what their body language looks like. How exactly do they get someone to recognize that they want to talk to them? and looking at all of those different things. You know, kind of being social detectives. Think about what people might be doing or feeling in certain circumstances through observation. Seeing if your student can predict what might happen next in a movie or a TV show. And also assessing what possible motives and intentions are in various interactions in the media. So you can use your students' special interest to facilitate conversations. If they're interested in comics, you can take them to the comic book store. And there they may find people that are also interested in comics, and that gives them a good conversation base to start out with, and then they can transition into other topics. Teach them to ask questions about other people to show that they're interested in them, and to ask questions that discover commonalities with other people, so that, again, you can build those conversations. Another important factor is to support self-advocacy. Your students probably interact with a lot of professionals over the course of their lives, and that's a good place to start. Instead of speaking for them, allow them to speak to their teachers, their instructors, their coaches, their therapists, their doctors. Allow them to be the ones to practice the conversations in those settings, and that's a really safe way to build on those skills. Use every opportunity that you have for them to practice self-advocating, even if it's calling up a friend and explaining to the friend why they want to see this movie over a different movie, and being able to state kind of their main point and then some supporting details so that they can be persuasive. You may have to write some dialogue with your student in order for them to feel comfortable with what they're going to say. You can rehearse, you can videotape, which is a great way for our students to see how they're coming across in a conversation. Videotape them, play it back, talk about what they liked, what they didn't like in their approach, and do some fine-tuning. I want to talk a little bit about variety with our students. So often they get stuck in their special interest or in their comfort zone, and it's really hard for them to vary their daily activities and their interests to include others. So that's why a variety of different kinds of activities in their life really enriches their ability to have a conversation. So that's something to consider, and we know that the students often can be reluctant to do that. So take whatever sort of help that you need and enlist your family, enlist your friends, enlist older brothers and cousins, and even professionals as needed. If you can't get your student to try different activities and you can't get a friend or a family member to encourage them enough to get them to do it, consider sending them to a campered educational program, such as the summer program that we have here at the college internship program. Oftentimes they're more willing to do things like that if they're already out of their familiar area. And also consider using animals as facilitators. You know, you go to a dog park and there's 20 other people with their dogs, and they love their dogs as much as you love your dog, and so you have the ability to have, you know, a wonderful conversation about something that you're both interested in and familiar with. So that can be a great venue to get your student out there and talking to other people. And then also I want to emphasize the importance of downtime. Our students need downtime, and actually everybody needs downtime. So what we have to determine and help the student determine is how much downtime do they need, you know, and how to perhaps schedule that downtime for a time of day that maybe they know that they're not socially at their best, and to take advantage of that knowledge by scheduling it and kind of building your activities and some of your life experiences around that need to have downtime so that they can kind of recharge their batteries and then next time go out and give their social communication their best try. So all of these things in combination help our students to really grow socially and expand their ability to communicate socially. And that is a very important factor for them throughout life, and it ties right into their life skills as well. So I'm now going to turn it over to Anthony, our life skills coordinator, to talk about that.
All right. Okay. Thank you, Jodi. I appreciate it. My name is Anthony Mila. I'm the life skills coordinator here at the Brevard Center. I have been here for 3.5 years. My background is in behavioral psychology as well. So life skills is a big part of a student's life. And the way I look at it is everything else kind of builds off of what happens at home. But before they can get those life skills, we need to get them ready for independence. Before they can move out, they need to have the skills that they need to actually move out on their own. When we get new students in, one of the first questions that we have for that student is, are you motivated to be independent? It might seem like kind of a ridiculous question to some of us because for a lot of us, motivation to be independent was always there. You know, you always wanted to have your own place, and you always wanted to be able to be your own boss at home and do whatever you wanted to do. I know my motivation to move out for college was, you know, I get my own place, I can have friends over, I don't have my mom following me around and nagging me. So, of course, to me, that seems very obvious. Why wouldn't you want to be independent? But for a lot of our students, that's not the case. Remember, life at home's pretty good. Somebody's there to cook for you. Somebody's there to clean up for you. Somebody's there to take you wherever you need to go. And most of the time, somebody's there to make sure you have the money to do what you want to do. So it's important for you to sit down with your student and talk to them about what their motivation is. It's not going to be the same as yours, probably, although you will find students that have very basic motivation. A lot of times, it's going to take a little bit of work and a little bit of digging for you to figure out what it is that makes your student want to get out and be on their own. So help them find a reason to be independent. Don't expect that they already know it. Don't assume that their motivation is the same that yours was at that time. Next, I'd like to talk about setting clear expectations. Just as you can't expect your student to know what their motivation is, you also can't expect for them to understand your expectations if you're not going to explain them to them. So you may need to talk to them about what your expectations are for them while they're at home. Are they expected to clean up after themselves? Are they expected to do their own laundry? Are they expected to get up on their own? I would suggest that now is the time for these expectations to be set for your students, because when they move out, it's too late. They're still going to need you to handle that stuff for them because they've never been given the opportunity to do it on their own, or they've never been asked to. So obviously these things, again, seem simple to us. An expectation to pick up after myself. Of course I'm expected to pick up after myself. But if you've never explained that to your student, if you've never given them that clear expectation, they may not know. And right now is the time, because these are the building blocks of their independent lives. This expectation that you set now is going to be the expectation they have for themselves moving forward. It's also important for you to explain to them your time frame for their independence. If they're 17 years old and you expect for them to move out and be on their own when they're 18, except you've never actually told them that, you can't really expect that they're going to know that. And when they turn 18, as far as they're concerned, nothing's changed. But for you, it's time for them to be on their way. So if you have a time frame, or if you'd like to have a time frame, and I would suggest that you do, now is the time to do it. Is your student 14, 15, 16? Either way, that's fine. Now is the time to talk to that student about what comes next and when it comes next. If you want your students to be independent adults, now is the time to start treating them like independent adults. Not after they move out. They have no experience with it then. But if you can give them that experience now, it's going to be a much easier transition. One of the more difficult things that my students run into when they haven't been given a lot of training at home is balancing fun and obligations. Your child's ability to balance fun and obligations is another thing that's going to stick with them for the rest of their lives. Now is the time to start scheduling doing things that they like versus doing things that they need to do. If they can handle that right now, they're going to be better equipped to handle their obligations when they become independent. I had a student when I first arrived at the Brevard Center that was playing sometimes more than 40 hours of video games a week. First of all, that was amazing to me. I can't imagine putting that much time into something that doesn't actually create anything. But there you go. His motivation is much different than mine is. And we were having a hard time getting him to the center to do anything else because he was so focused on that video game, and that came first to him. So what did we do? Well, we're not going to fight him and tell him that he can't play the video games. So we decided the best way for us to handle this situation is to work around the video games first. That's the motivation for him. His motivation is to play the video games. So what are we going to do? We're going to schedule his appointments around the times that he needs to be playing that video game. Now, I don't want you to think we were having him play 40 hours of video games a week, because that's not possible. But we didn't cut it back to 5 hours a week either. It's something you do slowly. You slowly cut back that fun and start to add in that obligation. Eventually, for this student, he was able to run his entire schedule. He had a set time each night that he played video games, and he had a few days each month that we might not see him at all because he was playing that video game. And it was okay because it was scheduled. It was something we knew about. He had decided ahead of time. He'd let us know when this was going to happen, and he would make sure that all of his obligations were taken care of before he took that day off. So that was a perfect example of balancing that fun and obligation. And when that student moved on, I'm sure he was able to carry that with him. And when he got a job or when he finished college, he was able to understand the necessity of balancing these things. Another thing that we don't want the students to learn on their own, and they need to work on while they're at home, is that failure is always an option. There is this safety net that the students get used to having. I didn't get up for work on time, but that's okay. Mom came and got me. I spent all my money, but that's all right. Dad gave me some more. There's a million different ways that parents use safety nets to help their students out, and it's great when they're at home. And because they have your support, it's a fantastic time to be able to do that. But now is also the best time to let them fail. And I don't mean let them fail school, and I don't mean let them get fired from their job. But if they get up late in the morning and they don't show up for their job on time, what happens? Probably going to be reprimanded by their boss. That's what we call a natural consequence. It's the same thing that would happen to any of us if we did the exact same thing. That's going to help motivate them, perhaps, to get up on time the next morning. So let them fail, and let them do it now while they're at home and they have your support to help build them back up. Don't let them think that there's always going to be that safety net when they're gone. Because when they are independent and when they're living on their own and they fail, who is going to be there to help them build back up? So from there, I want to talk about setting your student up for success. Along with all the things we've already talked about, structure is a very important part of independent living skills. I find that with structure, the students are able to know what comes next. And when they know what comes next, that means there's no surprises. And without those surprises, a lot of times you're not going to see the failure that we just talked about, because they understand what happens. This means scheduling, free time, and obligations like we just talked about. And this is also important for you to make sure right now that they're following these schedules, that they're following the structure that you create for them. Now, it's also important, as far as the structure goes, that you eventually fade your prompts and you make sure that they are obligated to do these things for themselves and not just because you say so. Okay. So for the independent living skills themselves, it would be pointless for me to tell you about laundry and cleaning. I think you guys know how to do that. The question is, how do we get your students to do it regularly? How do we teach them to do that on their own without having you there to make sure that they do it? And this is really where executive functioning comes into play for life skills. Now, I'm not going to go over everything with executive functioning. I think I'll let Ryan take care of most of that. But I do want to talk about executive functioning as it applies to life skills. And in this case, we're talking about planning, organization, managing time, task initiation. Does any of this sound familiar to you? I'll bet it does, because these are usually the problems that the students have, and it kind of is the base of all of the issues that the students run into. So the best way for me to explain helping your student with executive functioning, and therefore helping them with things like cleaning, is to take cleaning for example. Cleaning is a very open expectation to have of your student. When you tell your student to go clean their room, what does that mean? To them, it could mean shoving some things under the bed, sticking some stuff in the closet, and they walk out with a big grin on their face and say, hey, I'm ready to go. My room's clean. So what is the problem there? Is the problem that they're intentionally trying to frustrate you? Or is the problem that you didn't really give a very clear expectation of what you wanted from them? In these cases, I would always suggest taking a more measured approach to this. So if you expect your student to clean his room, maybe the first few times you clean it with them. That way, not only do they know what there is expected of them, but they see how you do it. This is also a good time to maybe create lists for them. Create a list as you clean so they know they can prioritize what they're supposed to do. This goes in their room. Every time you ask them to go clean their room, they can just look at the list. They don't need you to be there. Another thing that I've found that works with a lot of my students, especially the new students, is I take a picture of their room when it's clean. And then I post that in the room right next to their lists. That way it's not necessary for them to come to me and check to see if their room is clean, because it's right there. Their room needs to look like that picture. Now you've set a clear expectation. Now you've created a list. Next thing you need to do is schedule times for their cleaning. Make it something that they can expect. Every Friday I need to clean my room. Why is this necessary? Because they see it coming. It's not a surprise. You're not going to have an issue with them fighting you on it because they already knew it was coming. So now you've worked on prioritizing what they need to do, scheduling what they need to do, and eventually you need to fade your prompts to have them clean their room and make sure that they start to do these things on their own. And that works on task initiation. Another thing that I think gets passed over quite often is cooking. Most of my students arrive here with little to no cooking experience. We have a questionnaire, and one of the, I think, one of the answers on the questionnaire, or one of the questions is, can your student cook on his own? And they give 4 responses. No, not at all. Can make toast and boil water, and so on and so on. And about 90% of the time, the answer that I get from parents is, can make toast and boil water. And you got to think to yourself, what is your student going to do when he moves out on his own and all he can do is boil water and make toast? That sounds like a boring day. So it's important right now for you to start having them cook. Not just for themselves, have them cook with you. Show them what cooking means. Does it just mean going in the kitchen and putting something together? It doesn't, and that's what we teach our students here. Cooking includes pre-planning, finding a recipe that you want, creating a grocery list, doing the grocery shopping, making sure that you make it home with everything, and then following that recipe list until it's finished. And then, of course, my favorite, cleaning up afterwards. So that's a lot. That entails a lot. And when you just say cooking, you don't think about all those things. And I can guarantee when you just say to your student, you know, it's important that you're able to cook some things before you move out, I guarantee they're not thinking about that whole list that I just gave you. So that's something you need to sit down with them and explain. It's not just about making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. There's a lot more that even goes into peanut butter and jelly sandwich than putting peanut butter and jam on a piece of bread. One of my least favorite issues that I have to deal with sometimes is personal hygiene problems. Now, this is a difficult one for me because I have to talk to these, you know, sometimes 20, 25-year-old students about poor hygiene. And this is probably a difficult thing for you to deal with at home as well, but it's very necessary, and I'll tell you why. Just like everything else follows you for the rest of your life, your hygiene while you're a child or while you're a teenager, that's the practice that you're going to continue through college and through work. Don't expect that when your students move out that their hygiene is going to get better. I can guarantee you it's going to go the opposite direction. So, another thing you need to speak to them about, why is hygiene important? Get them motivated about it. For my students, a lot of times it's very simple. Going to their internships. I can almost guarantee all of my students are going to be showered the night before their internships. Why does that work for them? I'm not sure, but I run with it. I say, hey, you've got an internship tomorrow, make sure you take a shower. It works fantastic. So you need to find what motivates your student to do the same thing. What is it that they really need to do or want to do so that they'll take that shower? But it's not only that. Maybe they don't understand the expectations of the shower. So that might be something you need to work on with them too. Obviously, it gets much more difficult as they get older. It's very difficult to teach a 22-year-old how to take a shower because they are set in their ways and they don't want to hear it from you. But when you have a student now, if you notice some hygiene problems, now is the time to deal with that. Another issue that the students run into is transportation when they leave. You know, I think that our advisors would suggest that students leave the house with at least a learner's permit for driving. Generally, this means some professional driving lessons. The reason that that's necessary is public transportation is not always available everywhere you go. We have centers at CIP that have fantastic public transportation, and we have centers that don't. So make sure that your students, again, don't rely on you for that transportation, but have the ability to, you know, find a way to get to work, find a way to get to school. And if that means right now you ride the bus with them a few times so they can get comfortable, great. If that means you push them a little bit to work on that driver's license, even if they maybe don't want to, great. But make sure you do it now, because again, when they get out of the house, it becomes much more difficult. Banking, this is another issue that needs to be started very early. The first thing I want to talk about is the progression of using cash to the debit card. I would definitely warn everyone not to start with the debit card. The debit card means here's a card and it's worth money. Where does that money come from? I don't know. How much money is on that card? I have no idea, but it's on here. This is where it's at. That's not true. Of course, you and I both know that, but maybe your students don't. And so now is the time to start with a cash system. The great thing about cash is they know what it's worth. They know how much they have because they can hold it in their hand, and they can watch it go right out of their hand as they buy whatever ridiculous thing it is they think they need right then. Next, work on the checks. Have them balance a checkbook. Make sure they understand what it means when you write a check and that money comes out. And then eventually you can move on to the debit card when they're ready. I would obviously, you know, by the time they move out of the house and by the time they're ready to go to college, a debit card is a good thing to use. So I would make sure that you work on it now. Again, you don't want them to have to learn that stuff on their own when they don't have you around as that support. Also, being able to determine essential things versus non-essential things. I have students that will go to a comic book store and spend $150, and then when I take them to the grocery store, they're not willing to pay more than $30. What is the essential item between those two things? Obviously, it's food, but as far as my students are concerned, it's comic books. So that's something you need to work on right away. The food is definitely number one. Electricity, making sure they keep that on. Paying insurance on their car. Whatever it is, whatever bills that your students have, they need to understand what the important ones are, and when they have money, when they can set that aside for what they want. And following a budget, of course. So now is the time for you to list these things for them so that they can see as a whole, what does a budget look like, why do I need to follow it, and how does that work? And finally, something we kind of already talked about before with balancing fun and obligations is just healthy limits for things like video games and TV. Another thing that we run into a lot are students that kind of shut themselves off in their rooms. They don't see the point in the socializing because they have friends online, and they don't see the point in coming out and talking to their roommates because they like playing their video games. Now is the time to get that student out. Push them to be more social, even if they don't want to. If you can do it now when they're young, it's going to stick with them. If they go to a program like ours or they go to college and no one's ever pushed them to become social, they're just going to be shut in, and it's not going to be the experience that they should have at college. So that's it for life skills. We're going to move forward to careers with Jennifer. So I'll leave it to you, Jennifer.
Okay, thanks, Anthony. Hi, everybody. I'm Jennifer. I'm the career coordinator, and I have been with CIP for about 9 years now. My background's in industrial organizational psychology, or the psychology of the workplace. And tonight I'm going to talk about 3 main areas. The first is going to be building a strong foundation for your students, which is going to build on a lot of what Anthony was saying and Jodi. The second is gaining volunteer or internship work experience. And the last is preparing for a job search. So starting out, building a strong foundation, I just want to really stress careers is not just about careers. It really is hard to make progress in the area of careers until a student has a very strong foundation in other areas. It doesn't mean it's not possible, but things like Anthony's talking about with independent living skills and social skills like Jodi's talking about, those form the foundation that's necessary for a student to really move forward in terms of being successful in the workplace. So the first thing to really think about when you're building the foundation is overall health for the student. So I know this seems like a given, but it's really critical. We all know that we can't be good in the workplace if we're not healthy overall, because you're going to tend to miss work or not be able to cope with stress that arises, and we all know stress arises in the workplace. So you need to be thinking about, is the student taking their medications independently? Are they taking their medications, period? Are they getting a good night's sleep? How's their diet so they're keeping their energy up? Because we know a work day can, definitely drain you a bit. And are they dealing with sensory issues effectively, seeing their doctor, and of course like hygiene, like Anthony was talking about. All these are part of their overall health, and they really are critical. The next part of building that foundation is independent living skills and executive functioning skills, which Ryan will talk about a little bit later. But, to talk a little bit about some examples, I think about our students who might have trouble getting out the door in the morning. They might have an internship, and of course, not all internships or work can start at noon. God bless them who can, but a lot of people have to start a lot earlier. So that means you got to get out the door in the morning in a reasonable amount of time. So like Anthony said, thinking about doing what you have to do the night before so you're ready. Are the clothes ready? Have you showered if you're not a morning person? Things like that. I think of a student who, well, he might get ready for the most part, but then would go to his car. He didn't have gas in his car, so he couldn't get to his internship. But then he didn't have money in the bank so that he couldn't use the debit card to get the gas to get to his internship. And so you think about all these different levels, and they build. So the bottom line is there's a lot more to it than just get to your job. You have to make sure everything's put into place so you can get there in the morning. And like Anthony said, even just transportation itself. Okay, if you're not going to drive, are you going to get used to riding the bus? Are you going to walk? Are you going to bike? There's got to be a means of transportation, because I think mom and dad don't want to be doing it forever. And speaking of mom and dad, I know listening to all this can probably be really overwhelming, and I really believe it does take a village, and luckily here we have a village. It's not all going to happen overnight, so when you're hearing what we're talking about, like Anthony said, start younger. If you can start earlier in middle school, great. If you're already to where your student is about to graduate or has already graduated college and they're struggling, start in 1 or 2 places and build from there, because we know you can't do it all overnight, and we don't expect you to. Social skills, social thinking, like Jodi was talking about, in the workplace, that's a big one, getting along with your coworkers. And 2 things that come up a lot are TMI, which I think most of you know, too much information, big one for our students, and NEI, which I probably made up, which is, not enough information. So you're not communicating enough information to people. But those social skills, communication skills are really an important part of that foundation. doing some career assessments. Again, you know, trying to figure out where a student might be headed. Luckily, a lot of schools are doing more of this, but the assessments are more than just finding out what your student is interested in. Your, you know, student or the young adult you're working with might be interested in dinosaurs or Pokemon, could be rockets, whatever it is. But whatever they want to do, there's got to be a demand for that job. They have to have the aptitudes to do that job. So maybe they want to be a doctor. Okay, do they have the aptitudes to go to college to get the degree and be successful in the job? So make sure that your student is participating and conducting some career assessments on work values, interests, aptitudes, sensory evaluations, etc., so they can figure out what is a good direction. Do not just base it on interests alone. We want to build around our students' special interests, and maybe there's an industry they're interested in, but maybe they're not going to be the doctor, but maybe they could work in a medical environment, and they could even do the office work, or they could be a lab tech. There may be another avenue for them within a special interest. So sometimes you got to be creative there. And also, I think about, you know, the Titanic does not turn in like a few minutes, right? It takes a while, and sometimes you got to turn that boat slowly, and that means maybe they're set on one avenue, and you got to help them turn that over time, because it's not going to happen overnight. Another part of that foundation is just talking about what are their rights in the workplace. I think this is one that a lot of our students, until they come to CIP, have not talked much about. What accommodations could they have in the workplace? If I ask about accommodations, they'll say, yeah, I know about that because I can, in school, get extra test time, you know, whether it be in high school or college. But in the workplace, what does accommodations mean? You know, can you get extra time to complete a job? Can you get flex time if maybe you're not great in the mornings, but you can still work a full day? Maybe you need some special type of technology. So, you know, think about helping that student learn about what accommodations are possible. There's some great websites for that. And then how to disclose if they are going to disclose. And when's the right time to disclose? You know, because a lot of times they might think it's during the job interview. Might not be during the job interview. It might be after they've been offered the job and then talking to their supervisor. So that's all a part of building the strong foundation. Next, I want to talk about gaining volunteer and internship experience. And to me, this is one of the most important steps once they have those other things put into place. And the first part of, you know, when they start gaining that experience, keep in mind, start small and build from there. I think a lot of times families might expect a student to be able to work many, many hours in a week, and they haven't had any experience at all. So perhaps start with volunteering on the weekends. Maybe do that 4 times a year. Then build up to interning maybe 2 hours a week or 3 hours a week. Start small. I think what happens is we're so focused on academics, and Ryan will talk about that next, but we're so focused on getting student through to get their high school diploma that, you know, we're trying to get them through to their diploma, but we're not getting them experience. They might not be doing community service. They might not be doing an internship. So this is something that kind of comes out of the blue to them. So it is difficult, but at least by a student's senior year, see if they can be doing a regular internship if possible. So when they're getting experience, some of the main reasons they need to do this is they need to build perseverance. This is like a key thing that we see our students struggle with. Something happens. It could be something to do with social thinking. It could be something to do with, you know, they don't have gas in the car. They don't have clothes ready in the morning. You never know what it is, but they might just shut down, or they might not know how to persevere, especially when things get really tough, if you're hitting sticky situations in the workplace. A big part of that is emotional regulation, so learning to cope with those difficult times and be able to push through. So you want to start small and build over time, because that way, as they're exposed to more challenges, they're knowing how to handle them. And also developing cognitive flexibility. So, of course, some rigidity can be a challenge a lot of times for our young adults, and helping them develop that flexibility over time so they understand. And a lot of that's about perspective taking. Jodi talks to her students about what their own perspective is, might be different than what their boss's perspective is. I had a student who was doing like a mock job interview on a computer, and she was frustrated because she did not give the answer that she thought would be the right answer, because she was thinking from her own perspective and maybe not from that employer's perspective or the computer simulation's perspective of the employer. She was thinking about what she thought was right. And so learning to develop that flexibility is really important, seeing perspectives of others. Asking for regular feedback is definitely a big part of that, why experience is so important. Think about it in terms of our feedback. A lot of times, most workplaces, an annual evaluation happens, of course, annually. Okay, so once a year, you get a written evaluation that tells you how you're doing. Well, if you wait a year to give feedback, written, concrete, black and white feedback to our students, chances are they've missed a lot in the meanwhile, and they might not even make it to the year. So asking for feedback verbally, that is a possible accommodation. Asking for some verbal feedback. Can we meet twice a week, even for just a half an hour, so you can let me know how I'm doing and what I can do to improve? That will help a student tremendously. If their supervisor is even willing to fill out a feedback form, that's wonderful. With my students going to internships, I have their supervisors fill out feedback forms every several months so that I can see how they're doing. I'd say about maybe a month and a half in, 2 months tops, and the student can see how they're doing. Are they above average, average, below average? How are they performing in terms of an overall rating, and what are their strengths and weaknesses? That's something where they can look at that. They can pretty much understand what their supervisor is saying because it's very concrete. And a lot of times we get feedback, and it might be just as we're going from one meeting to a next, or in passing, and it's verbal, and maybe it's not very direct. Not everybody's always direct in the workplace. With our students, they need direct. A lot of times on a scale of 1 to 5, if I ask a student, how do you think you're doing, before I share the feedback, they might say, not all students, maybe a 4 or maybe a 5. That's above average. That student might be performing at a 2. So I can see that they're not understanding the perspective of their supervisor and what their supervisor is seeing. So that regular feedback, really important part of why experience is so important. Utilize a job coach if needed. So think about this for your student. Maybe part of starting small and building is having somebody there to be a support for them. Supervisors are really busy. A lot of times they do not have time to slow down and give direct feedback a lot, give direct instruction all the time. They need to be able to say, this is what I need you to do, and go forth and do it. So a job coach can help a student, give them feedback behind the scenes, give them direction and training. So it's definitely something to consider, and a lot of our students do start out with job coaches if that would benefit them, and then progress toward working without a job coach and hopefully maintaining their performance while they're doing that. Some of the common pitfalls for our students. I wanted to share a few examples with you. In terms of the workplace, well, one that we talked about was poor executive functioning, which can lead to tardiness. That's a big one. So preparing the night before is a strategy, and develop a morning checklist might be a strategy. Increased absences due to maybe not that overall health issue we talked about. So maybe setting medication reminders might be helpful, and using a timesheet to track their attendance so they know when they're missing work, because they may not realize how much they're starting to miss over time. Another common pitfall might be failure to communicate with their supervisor if they are going to be late or absent. We know this one supervisors are not happy about at all. And matter of fact, I had a student who was doing this earlier this week. So, that supervisor, if a student is going to miss for any reason, they want to call. So that communication and practicing that, so important. I can call, the job coach can call. but they want to hear directly from that student. So maybe if your student has an internship and they're living at home, make sure that they're the one making that phone call, not, you or somebody else for them. Make sure they do that. And I have to say, even with something, I am starting young with my own daughter even. They stress for her dance, you do not miss, and if you're going to miss, you have to call in. So sure enough, at age 9, you need to call and explain if you're not feeling well. So this is something that it's good to just start and not wait till they're away. Social thinking in the workplace and communication, we talked a little bit about that. That's a common pitfall for our students. And technology, I don't even think I need to say this one, but our students tend to get distracted by technology. So I'm sure you guys can relate to this one. But a lot of times I find students like to be on the computer for a job. They like to be on the computer at home as well. But if they like computers, they like to do a job that involves computers. But if they cannot stay on task without getting distracted, it's going to be a big problem. So working on identifying the pitfalls and then developing strategies to overcome those pitfalls. So if they have trouble being distracted by technology, set clear rules and put those technological devices away. Like a student, he was bringing his laptop computer to his internship. Do you need your laptop computer at your internship? No? Okay, don't bring it because it's going to be a distraction. You know it's going to be hard to resist. If they get distracted by an iPhone, then don't have it set up where they can be surfing the internet on an iPhone. Get an old cell phone that might just have texting or something, but that's it. But setting that cell phone aside, putting it away so they're not distracted. Lastly, I said I wanted to talk a little bit about preparing for a job search. So everybody knows the student needs to develop a resume, references, cover letters, thank you letters. There's tons of literature out there how to do this. The most important thing is help them be involved in the process, help provide support so they can be involved and still learn what they need to do so that later in the future, hopefully they can go in and update their resume and know how to do it. And again, they have to start developing experience to be able to put something on a resume, so that's important. Interviewing practice, that's an important thing. I had one of my all-time favorites in class. We were doing practice phone calls for job searches. I had some students use Career Builder, apply for some jobs, and some of them actually started getting phone calls. I thought that's great. Even though they might not be looking for a job at the moment, let's go through the practice. And they started getting a job phone call, and one of them said, he got a phone call. I just got out of the shower, so can you wait a few minutes? I'm going to go change, and I'll be right back with you. There's so much that went wrong with that. He's like, the call just did not go well at all. So have them practice answering phone calls. Perhaps even just call them randomly when they're not expecting it, or somebody else, and call them. Have them practice that. Practice interviewing face-to-face. There's a great new interview software I'm enjoying using with our students called the Molly Porter Job Interview, and that gives some feedback on how their answers are. Make sure they organize their job search, print out their job postings, because there's nothing worse than getting a phone call saying, I would like for you to come in for an interview, and they don't know even what job it was and what the job description was. Help them develop some support systems and learn about networking. I definitely suggest they get up on LinkedIn once they start to develop a resume so that they can see how professional networking takes place. And just so you know, like I just assigned homework about networking, which is identify 2 people you know for networking that you know directly and 2 people you know indirectly through somebody else. This was really quite a task. I had a student say, okay, I've got my 2 people, this is them. I said, great, that sounds good. Okay, I got 2 more people. It's this person and this person. Well, guess what? It was at the same place he's already interning. He said, yeah, but I don't really know them. They're there, but I don't really know them. I said, well, you know them. They know of you. It's really not helping you network any further because you've already listed some other contacts that you know really well, and they know you. So just because you don't know them well, okay, you can put them down. But networking is about having people you know tell you, who else could I speak to that might have a job or know of a job? Networking is a really foreign concept for our students. And lastly, set some gradual and realistic expectations, both for our students and our families. Just know it's not going to happen overnight. I think a lot of families expect, you know, my student graduated high school, it's time to get a job, it needs to be full-time, and they need to start supporting themselves. Have they ever had a part-time job before? Have they had the independent living skills? Have they had the social skills? Are they taking their meds independently? Are they not on video games certain hours? You've got to start somewhere and build. So, you know, start with community service, 2 hours of an internship, 6 hours of an internship, build over time, help them maintain it, and then hopefully work toward that full-time job. So, college and careers are very closely intertwined for many of our students. So Ryan is going to speak to you next about academics.
Thanks, Jennifer. Hi, I'm Ryan Therriault. I'm the academic coordinator here at the College Internship Program, Brevard Center. I have a BA in psychology, a master's in social science education. I've been with the College Internship Program, it'll be about 6.5 years. But today I would like to talk to you about getting your students started in college, transitioning from high school to college and other academic endeavors to help expand their knowledge base and eventually to a career, to support them for a career. Now, first of all, you have to set a goal. You know, and as Anthony had mentioned, you have to state your expectations for the students and understand that they're the same as yours. You know, I've had students, many students come in wanting to get degrees in game design, and recently, I guess it's a thing now. But, you know, that's very challenging, and it's a very competitive career field. So, you know, we really have to look at, you know, all around interests that are realistic, and also understanding that although you want to get a degree in game design, you also have to take general education classes in order to support the ultimate degree that would best support you in that field. So let's say we set a long-term expectation for a student to get a degree. The best way to go about doing that is to, first of all, assess the student's ability for academics. Many students come into the program and they're intelligent and you know, scoring well on tests and doing well and getting good grades, and their potential for college seems very good. But as you know, everyone else has mentioned, social skills are incredibly important as well. You know, they're smart enough. The students are smart enough to know, but what's challenging is expressing what they know in the way that others understand and expect. You know, to gather all the knowledge is great, but you also have to give it back to, say, your instructors in the way that they're asking you to, and it may be something that you disagree with, but you'll have to push through it, just as you would in all aspects of life. So it's a really great social thinking exercise for the student. Fortunately and unfortunately, you do get easy feedback from your instructors in college. The people who can help you with this, though, are the ed consultants. They can help you with assessing the students' educational perspective, capabilities, and the options that might be laid before them. Educational psychologists as well. And the disability specialist for the college that the student may be looking into, or the academic program that they're looking into, a support program. Here it's the disability services. And what they do is allow for or assess and explain what accommodations would best work for the student, such as extra time on tests, testing in a quiet room, preferential seating, using computer for all written work for students that have fine motor skill difficulties or writing disabilities. We also have students come in with math learning differences. They're able to use a calculator on tests and formula cards. Those are just a few examples. You could talk to your local college for specifics on the types of accommodations that they can get. The teachers, though, will give the students feedback on a regular basis, and that's something that the disabilities office can assist you with, is choosing an instructor who will give feedback. And when I say feedback, I mean in the form of grades, assessments. We're talking like tests, quizzes, homework. The more assignments, the better, because it gives the frequency allows for the student to improve should they make mistakes. There's more opportunity for mistakes, but the mistakes are worth less. So it makes more sense to choose a teacher that gets feedback frequently. So one of the things that the students are allowed to do is fail just a little bit. I understand that getting grades that like an F is expensive when it comes to college, so it makes it a little bit different than other areas of a student's life. It's a lot is weighing on them, and there's a lot of pressure as far as money goes, and as far as parents' expectations go. And so, in order to deal with those pressures, I recommend that the students expand their timeline. I think that it's very important to pace slowly, to take the minimal number of classes, especially in the first semester, and I mean like 1, maybe 2 classes. Understand that even though your student is incredibly intelligent, it's difficult to emotionally handle a change from high school to college. It's very different. You're not getting the support from your instructors that you get from high school. You're not getting the support from your friends that you get in high school. You're not getting the same environment, especially if they're going to a large university, which brings me to my next point. If at all possible, I think that it's important for students to go to a smaller college or a place that has a smaller atmosphere, smaller class size, in order for them to get to know their instructors. If they get to know their instructors can provide them with direct feedback. It's easier to talk to a student in a class with 35 students versus a class with 400 students. It's also easier for the student to talk to the instructor. And as they get to know the instructor, they'll engage them more frequently, or the possibility of engagement is more is easier. Also, if a student starts to slip in a class, typically, and it's not the university, it's not the college instructor's responsibility to let the student know that they're falling behind on anything. But if the student establishes a relationship with the instructor, they're more inclined to either let them know or give them maybe a second chance, or just deduct them a few points if, say, they missed an assignment. I've had this happen on several occasions where it was a misunderstanding, or where the instructor had given verbal instruction, but the student only didn't hear what they said, or only partially heard what was said, and there was no written instruction at all. That's not really the fault of the instructor necessarily, but and it's up to the student to try and accommodate for that themselves. In this case, when a teacher would give a lot of verbal instruction, I would assist the student in emailing the instructor and asking for written instruction. If the written instruction is not provided, then you can always ask to audio tape the class so that no instructions missed. So as the students move forward, increase the class, the course intensity and the number of courses. Now keep in mind, when you add, say, a science class or an upper level math class, those are 4 to 5 credits. They take up that amount of time to study for, so make sure you take that into account. If you have a science class, for example, chemistry, there's going to be a lab involved as well. So, make sure that the student is making time to deal with that, as well as the other classes that they're taking on. You might want to decrease the intensity. They might want to decrease the intensity for that term. I've had students who started with 1 class and then increased to 2 and then 3 and then 4 over a course of, say, 3 years, and get an Associate of Arts degree, which is like the 2-year degree that feeds into a 4-year degree here in Florida. I can think of 2 students, actually, that did accomplish that. They did very well, and there were some hiccups along the way, but they did follow our advice, and they established relationships with their instructors. And when they ran into problems, they would email the instructors right away. They communicated with their instructors. If they missed something, they would email the instructor. It's so important to email the instructor immediately as soon as you know you're going to miss. I even had a student recently whose teacher didn't show up. I still insisted that he email the instructor just in case something went wrong, because you never know. So I just said, you know, if it's usual for her to be there, perhaps you should send her an email asking her how she's doing. Maybe she got in a car accident on the way or something happened to her. That's letting her know that you care about the class. And that's where social thinking comes in again with academics, is that, you know, the teacher wants the student to appear interested in the class. In many cases, they ask the student to do that in ways that they do not think make sense. But the point is, in order for the student to get the grade, they have to do what the instructor says, whether they think it's fair or not. In the case of these two particular students, they moved on to go to a four-year university, a pretty good four-year private university. They established supports like I had recommended, and they moved forward. However, they were doing really, really well in the first term, both of them. They were making friends. They took the minimum number of classes. They were, I think they were interning somewhere or working somewhere. They were both doing very well. And then all of a sudden, it's odd, it almost happened at the same time. Both of them had an emotional fallout with either a friend or I believe it was a friend. And the grades started to go downhill. Now, apparently along the way, they had lost connection, supports with their instructors, supports with the disabilities office, supports with, you know, pretty much anyone. Even their therapists, they had been kind of spotty attending because they felt like things were going very well and they were really happy. But then all of a sudden something wasn't going well, and they were apprehensive about reestablishing contact. And even when the contacts were reaching out to them, there were professors emailing them, there were therapists emailing them, their family was emailing them, and they had disappeared. This is something to watch out for when pacing and reassessing. You'll see that a student starts to go very well for a while. You know, once they figure out the ins and outs of college, they'll start to do better and better and better and better. Never let go of those supports. Always continue forward with them. And that helps, that brings me to executive functioning. You want the students to, I mean, we've talked about executive functioning in all areas so far. And I just wanted to explain that executive functioning in a nutshell is, you know, planning, prioritizing, organizing, and following through. So if you're planning, prioritizing, organizing, and following through, who can you use for supports for that? And in academics, it's the disability services, it's a therapist, it can also be your life coach, study groups, therapists, and the teacher. Now, you know, you're also using supports with your family, but what we're trying to assist these students in doing is becoming healthy, happy adults that are independent. And overall, we want them to seek their own supports. You know, anytime any of us need assistance, we go somewhere to find a support that best helps us. And in this case, those are the supports that help us, that help to build the structure, to help us plan, to help them follow through. The best way to go about planning in life in general, including academics, including careers, including social meetings and anything, obligations at home, is to use a calendar. To-do list, calendar, a planner, a notebook system. We need some sort of an organizational system that's on paper at first. If you're teaching a student to organize and plan, it should be on paper, in my opinion, first. Students have a tendency to move towards electronics, and I appreciate that, and I think they should. But when teaching a student how to plan and organize, and in this case we want to be very explicit about how the student organizes and plans, you need to use a paper system. That way you can see what they're thinking. Many times our students assume we know what they're thinking and what's going on, and we miss some of the information that is so important. We need to verbalize, again, our expectations. In this case, say that we're planning for, I don't know, some sort of academic event, like a test that's forthcoming. A student needs to study for 4 chapters. Now, up until now, they've acquired all of the chapter quizzes, and they've kept them in their organized notebook that says past chapter quizzes, we'll say. Well, on the calendar, it should say something like, you know, Monday we're going to study chapter 1, Tuesday chapter 2, Wednesday chapter 3, and so on until you get up to the point that it's, okay, time to take tests. You write take tests on Friday, and then it goes into your planner, taking tests at 9 a.m. in disabilities office. That's why it's so important to have those supports. I've had students say that they're going to, that they have a doctor's appointment on Monday at 2 o'clock. Okay, great. Let's write that down in your planner. Well, I don't need to write that down in my planner because my doctor's appointment's Monday at 2 o'clock. I get that. I'm going to remember that. It's fine. The next day, when's your doctor's appointment? It's Monday at 2 o'clock. I don't need to write it down. But on Monday at 2 o'clock, does the student remember to go to the doctor's appointment? Maybe at 1:45 they remembered, but perhaps something came along that distracted the student, and at 2 o'clock they didn't remember that it was time for the doctor's appointment. So in order to help the students cope with situations like that, we try to prevent them. You know, we use it as a learning experience, and you try to prevent it by having the students, teaching the students to check a planner daily, multiple times daily. So if the student checks the planner, say during meal times, it's something, if a student eats 3 times a day, and it's something that they're in the habit of doing, you can pair checking a planner 3 times a day. So at breakfast time, at lunch time, at dinner time, I'm going to check my planner and revise as needed. That way, if I had looked at my planner at lunchtime and 2 o'clock it was written down that I'm going to the doctor, I would know to be there at 2 o'clock. So that's the idea behind planning. That's the concrete idea behind planning. But it goes a little bit deeper than that, because the students have to show up ready to accomplish their goals. And at the very foundation of executive functioning is making sure that the student is ready to go for the day. Enough sleep, enough food, enough times a day. Many students require snacks throughout the day, every 2 hours, or they're not able to function at their best. And that means at their job, that means when they go to meet their boyfriend, that means when they go to class, or if they go to take a test, or if it's time to cook a meal. It's important that they've eaten regularly, that they have slept, that their emotions are easier to regulate. Those are things that we can control. Now, if something traumatic happens in that day, at least we have those things under control. It's a little bit easier to deal with those difficult and challenging events if you've at least covered, you know, the student's basic needs. And that, like I said, is the foundation of executive functioning. And establishing a plan for the student in all areas. Again, I want to refer back to the student that Anthony was talking about, because he is, you know, probably the most extreme example that I could think of too, where he had gone from spending so much time doing, you know, playing video games to balancing what he wanted to do and what he needed to do in order to get things accomplished. And as a result, he was able to realistically deal with his life. He didn't do everything that we wanted him to do. He didn't do everything that his parents wanted him to do. But he did end up with a job, and he did end up moving on to continue college. And overall, I would consider him to be successful, and he considers himself to be happy and where he needs to be at this point in time. And I think that's really what we're looking for, is for the students to be happy. And keep our expectations realistic and matching, having the students and parents, guardians and such matching, so that we're able to accomplish the things that help them to become happy adults. And that's how we're all connected. There's no such thing as too much support. Stephanie?
Okay, thanks guys. So we've had a couple questions come in, and Ryan, I think this first one is going to go to you, and it's from Alex L. And Alex says that he has a son that is finding it hard to put together complex projects in college, especially in the subjects that he has limited interest in. He tends to isolate, procrastinate to the limit that he fails the project, to the extent that he fails the project. So Alex would like to know how he can deal with this, and more specifically, how does he help him confront and push through those difficult projects?
That's a real challenge. We actually, that happens quite often, that a student really doesn't want to get through those moments. And what I found is helpful for the students, first of all, is that they use outside assistance. I had mentioned using tutors and life coaches, therapists, etc. What I would do is, if you're able to use somebody who is not a parent or not even associated with the school to assist with tutoring. Tutors are generally trained to help with executive functioning, and what you'll be looking for is a tutor that has experience working with students who have learning differences, particularly like ADD or Asperger's either, but ADD in particular is what you're looking for, and they can help the students plan through the projects. They have a tendency to be more, hold the students to the fire a little better than a parent who might be emotionally connected to the students. I think that, being separated from the students emotionally actually helps to maintain the structure for them. If you're unable to obtain a tutor and you have to do it yourself, the biggest thing you're going to need to do is help the student to plan. And the way that we are able to trick them into using a planner is to explain that, I don't know what you're thinking. Do you think you could write it down for me? Because I'm not really sure. I have this calendar here. Can you tell me when that project's due? And so if it's due that day, when would you finish that part? And if you finish that part, is there something that you would finish before that or after that? And that way they can kind of show you what their plan is. I think the disconnect there is that the student actually has a plan in their head. It's just in the moment, something distracts them, or it takes longer than they think it's going to. If you do it that way, perhaps you can get them to sort of do the planning for you, and you can have a visual and also hold them accountable for the plan that they've made themselves. Did I answer all the questions?
Yes, and I'm going to add to that just a little bit, if you don't mind. I myself, being a procrastinator and having poor EF, in college what I needed to do was break it down. You tend to get that syllabus and you can see it, that the project is going to be at the end of the class. So to make yourself put it on a calendar that maybe once a week or twice a week you're going to schedule 30 minutes to start on that project. And by breaking it down into 30-minute intervals a couple times a week and then building it up as you get closer to the due date of the project, it's easier to kind of work yourself into that for some people. And even if you maybe give yourself a treat. So if your student likes video games, you say, okay, so you work on this for 30 minutes and then you can have 15 minutes of video games, or whatever the case may be. So reward yourself for that bit of work. Discipline yourself that you can't do it until you've done 30 minutes. Sometimes that works as well. So Alex, I hope we answered your question. We have another question from Mara. And it's a little bit of a tricky question, and I'm going to start that, and then I think, Jodi, I'm going to ask you for support on this one. So Mara is stating that she's a student, so she's at the other end, And she's been stating that she wants a driver's license, and she's been trying to convince her mother that she needs this before she can get a job, but her mother won't listen. And so Mara wanted to know what she could do to convince her mother. First, I want to say that I'm sure, Mara, that your mother has a very good reason for it, and that you do have to understand that a driver's license is not a magic ticket that comes with a car and things like that. And there's also a lot of responsibility attached to having a car, such as insurance and other responsibilities. And these may be things factored into mom's decision. I don't know you. I don't know what mom's reasons might be, what your capabilities are, what other responsibilities and things you're showing. I also don't know where you live and what the transportation system looks like. Maybe your mother at this time is willing to drive you to a job because of the reasons. Maybe she wants to see some responsibility from you first. So maybe get the job first, have her drive you, and show mom that you can keep the responsibility of a job, put some money away, find out mom's reasons, and kind of go from there. There was a rule in my house when I was 16 that we couldn't have a driver's license until we kept our room clean. And I had no idea what the two meant, how they linked together, and thought it was a completely ridiculous idea until I had children. And then I kind of saw the correlation. It was all about responsibility. And am I responsible enough to keep a room clean? If I can't keep my room clean, then am I responsible enough to do what I'm supposed to do with the car, bring it home, keep the upkeep on the car? So maybe these are things that you do need to discuss with your mother. Jodi, you want to help me out on that one?
Yep, sure, Stephanie, thanks. Hi, Mara. I am going to basically mirror off of several things that Stephanie had mentioned. One of the ways that you might be able to convince your parents that you're ready to take on that type of responsibility is to show a lot of responsibility in other areas as well. Show your parents that you can handle increasingly difficult tasks and establish yourself as a reliable, dependable person, even probably more so than you already have. I would start with that. And then also you can on your own do some research as to what the cost would be associated with your driving and car ownership, and show your parents maybe that you can take and you can do a little bit of that research and information gathering on your own, maybe come up with a proposal when you advocate to mom about driving, and see what she needs to see from you to help her feel better about that experience, and open up that communication. And what I have found at times, our students and their parents need to find a different avenue for communicating. And that's when I recommend that you think about contracting with your parents, basically laying out what their expectations are for you with regard to this type of responsibility. You know, do they expect that maybe you need some driving lessons, and maybe perhaps you can come up with a plan of how to pay for those driving lessons, or, you know, how to earn them by doing helpful things around the house for your parents. And then you have a professional person in that driving instructor that maybe is able to either convince you to extend your timeline with that goal, or help you convince your parents that you may actually, in fact, be ready for that responsibility. So again, doing some research on your own, showing a lot of maturity, also, you know, looking at maybe contracting, writing the communication down between you and your parents if it's too much of a hot topic to talk about face-to-face. And then you may need to enlist the help of some other people. We have a concept at CIP called the donkey rule, and we use this when we try to make good decisions for ourselves. And with that, we enlist the advice and the support of people that we trust. You might have an older sibling, or an aunt or an uncle or a grandparent or a close family friend or someone like that that you're able to go to and say, you know, I'm having this dilemma. What are your thoughts about it? Do you think that this might be something that I could learn to be responsible for and learn to take on? And if those people do agree with you, and then it does look like, in fact, you are making a good decision to try driving, then I suggest that perhaps those people could advocate with you. If you're not getting the point across to your parent, because sometimes as parents we don't want to face these big milestones, you know, maybe that supportive person could help you as well. But, you know, I certainly wish that you and your parents are able to establish this kind of communication about this very, very important topic, and I wish the best for you.
I do want to add one more thing, Mara. Getting a driver's license is a step-by-step process. In a lot of states, you have to get a learner's permit first by taking a written test, and then you have to take the driver's test. So start the process. You know, first you have to get the restricted license, the learning permit first. So start through that. I personally have a daughter that has a central auditory processing disorder, and she is 24 years old, and actually can't get past the written part of the test. So it became a non-argument for us because she can't get past the written part. The other thing is you can go to an outside agency, like Jodi mentioned. You can get driving lessons and maybe have them weigh in. So doing something like that. But it's a step-by-step process, so start the steps. I know you did here just ask another question, and you mentioned your age, that you're 25. And you said that you're ashamed that you're not able to get off the ground. And I'm going to have Jodi weigh in again. I honestly, there's no timeline on things. People move at their own pace. We have this thing, and somebody mentioned it before. I think Anthony mentioned it when he said that people assume that when you turn 18, you just go, you get out on your own, and that's how it is. That doesn't work for everyone like that. So as long as you say you're a postgraduate student, so obviously you're working towards a goal. So just keep working towards that goal, and just think about yourself. Don't worry about anybody else's thoughts, except your mother. You have to listen to your mother. Jodi, you want to weigh in on that?
No, I agree with you, Stephanie. And again, whatever it is that you need in order to obtain a driver's license in your state, do the research on your own, find out what it is, and again, just keep working at that communication. When you go to those other people in your family or in your close circle of friends that you trust and have good judgment, and you listen for their ideas and their thoughts about you accomplishing this, you might gain some more insight into what some of the barriers might be, whether they're actual barriers to you getting your license or whether the barrier is a perception of another person that you might not be mature enough for that responsibility. But gather more information on what those issues are, and that way you can work on addressing them more effectively with your parents.
So I believe that's all the questions that we have. And look at us, right on time. Very good. So we hope that you enjoyed this and you got some good information out of it. If you do have any other questions, feel free to email me at sbrown, and that's brown just like the color, at cipbrevard.org. And Brevard is B-R-E, V as in victory, A-R-D as in dog. And I'll be happy to get the answers back to you. Again, thank you very much. Does anybody else have any final words?
Good luck.
Anthony, would you like a final word?
Thanks for watching.
All right, guys. Well, thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful evening.
Good night.
Good night.